Emotions erupt in the West Bank as Yasser Arafat is laid to rest and Palestinians face an unknown future. On the front line in Fallujah, house to house and sometimes room to room, U.S. troops root out a cornered enemy but face danger at every turn. The verdict, guilty. The sensational murder trial of Scott Peterson ends at last. We'll give you the inside story. And they won't go. The rebellion of American churchgoers trying to keep their houses of worship open.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. For the late Yasser Arafat, this day was a tale of two very different cities and dramatically different ceremonies. Arafat's official funeral in Cairo was a formal affair, attended by high-ranking officials from around the world. But what the Palestinian leadership intended as an equally solemn Muslim burial in the West Bank did not go according to plan. As CBS's David Hawkins reports, Palestinian authorities were simply unprepared for the outpouring of grief.
The helicopters carrying Yasser Arafat's coffin stirred up a sea of emotion. A crowd of thousands surged forward, ignoring the wild gunshots fired into the air by security to be closer to the body of the dead Palestinian president. Draped in the flag of the state he failed to bring into being, Arafat's coffin was carried a short distance to his gravesite inside the half-demolished Ramallah compound where he spent the final years of his life. Some mourners were overcome with sorrow, others by the momentous occasion. To many here, Arafat was a hero, a father figure, and today they reclaimed him. The riotous scene forced officials to abandon plans for a ceremony. There were no eulogies, no prayers as he was lowered into a marble-lined tomb. It's in some way fitting that Arafat's burial is characterized by chaos and that he had two funerals today. One in Cairo for Arafat the statesman, and this one here in Ramallah for Arafat the fighter. The dignified ceremony in Cairo could not have been more different. Presidents and kings attended the military state funeral. The U.S. sent an assistant secretary of state. Israel sent no one. The public was banned. Arafat's widow and his rarely seen 9-year-old daughter wept as his coffin was taken away for burial in Ramallah. Palestinians say that his tomb here is temporary, that one day they will fulfill Arafat's wish, denied by Israel, that he be buried in Jerusalem. Instead, soil from the holy city was placed in his West Bank grave. Arafat leaves his people far from realizing their dream of an independent Palestine, branded as terrorists, mired in corruption and political crisis. They'll remember him, though, not for his failure to win them a state, but for giving them a sense of themselves as a nation. David Hawkins, CBS News, Ramallah.
At the White House today, President Bush and visiting British Prime Minister Tony Blair discussed in broad, vague terms what it might take to achieve the Palestinian dream of nationhood. CBS's Bill Plant reports on Bush, Blair, and how they hope to seize the moment after the death of Arafat.
In the chaos and emotional upheaval which surround Yasser Arafat's death, the U.S. and Britain see a glimmer of hope tonight for revitalizing the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to address one of the root causes of Mideast instability.
I believe we've got a great chance to establish a Palestinian state, and I intend to use the next 4 years to spend the capital of the United States on such a state.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair has stood firmly with the president on Iraq at great cost to his standing at home. Blair rejected the idea that he was now looking for a payback on the Palestinian issue, but he urged Mr. Bush to push for progress.
We meet at a crucial time where it is important that we revitalize and reinvigorate the search for a genuine, lasting, and just peace in the Middle East.
Mr. Bush also offered an olive branch to the Europeans, including the Germans and French, who are anxious for progress on the Palestinian issue, pledging to mend transatlantic ties in his second term.
I intend to visit Europe as soon as possible after my inauguration.
The president offered no new plan for Mideast peace, nor did he talk about Israel's role in the process. He made clear his belief that under the existing U.S. plan known as the Roadmap, The Palestinians have a lot to do before they get their own state. Fight terrorism, move toward elections, and put democratic reforms in place.
We'll hold their feet to the fire to make sure that democracy prevails.
And that may take some doing. The Palestinians and Europeans would like to begin talking about things like the borders of the new state and the status of refugees. But administration officials have already put out the word, no shortcuts. Reform must come before statehood. Dan?
Bill Platt reporting live from the White House. Thanks, Bill. It's reported tonight that the Palestinian Authority has agreed to pay Yasser Arafat's widow, Suha Arafat, $22 million a year for living expenses in Paris. An Italian newspaper says the money will come from secret Arafat bank accounts said to contain up to $4 billion. Now to Iraq, where U.S. Marines and Army troops are still fighting, as they have been for 5 days, in the streets and alleys of Fallujah. It's not over yet. The military said today officially 22 Americans have been killed in the Fallujah operation and close to 200 wounded. CBS News combat correspondent Elizabeth Palmer shows you what it's really like at the point of the American spear.
American forces now control more than 80% of Fallujah, but getting there hasn't been easy. These pictures show a fierce firefight between soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division and a band of insurgents in the northeast of the city. The urban environment levels the playing field for the insurgents. The Iraqi gunmen are nearly impossible to pick out.
Is that it or what?
The Americans have been battling back with pure firepower. The general in charge of the operation says the U.S. plan is working. The insurgents have been pushed out of the center of the city and into the path of U.S. forces to the south.
Those who didn't want to fight to the death have had enough, and those who want to fight to the death are running out of steam. We'll accommodate them.
But taking the city may be easier than keeping the peace here.
Just as U.S. forces say they're confident they're wrapping up in Fallujah, out here in the countryside, 10 miles away, the insurgency hasn't slowed down one bit.
We were with a Marine unit supposedly outside the combat zone. They were trying to win over the local population, but somebody had a different idea.
Hey, it's White Platoon, so don't shoot at them.
It was a roadside bomb that caught the Marine patrol as it rolled by.
Hey, their vehicle's on fire!
3 Marines were injured, and the rest were shaken up.
Hey, get that driver out!
How are you feeling, shaken?
A little bit shaken. That was nerve-wracking. Caught us off guard, I'll tell you that. Totally caught us off guard.
The Americans can't afford to let down their guard in this complex and politically charged war. Each time they fight their way into a mosque, they may be winning a battle, but losing the goodwill of the people. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, with the Marines near Fallujah.
Also in Iraq today, the Baghdad government rushed reinforcements to the northern city of Mosul, one of the places hardest hit by this week's surge of guerrilla attacks and terrorist violence. Yesterday alone, not counting Fallujah, there were more than 130 attacks. CBS war correspondent Kimberly Dozier in Baghdad has the latest on this.
A trail of violence showed the insurgents' continuing migration across Iraq. The streets of the capital rang out today with sporadic mortar and weapons fire. And American jets circled Baghdad in a show of force not seen here since the battle to topple Saddam. In Mosul, U.S. jets bombed suspected militant targets after fierce fighting over the past few days claimed the life of an American soldier.
A little surprised at the level of the fighting. It was a bit larger force than we expected.
U.S. troops are on the trail of their now moving targets in other parts of Iraq. CBS News reporter Kirk Spitzer is with U.S. Special Forces, who raided a mosque 10 miles from Fallujah and found traces of explosives.
Small arms, RPG ambushes, and then people utilizing the mosque to escape through or around. Just causing a lot of havoc for us.
At another mosque in Baghdad, soldiers found hordes of weapons and photographs of recent attacks on American troops. They arrested the leading cleric there, but the crackdown only seemed to make these Friday worshipers more eager to join the militant ranks and attack those they say promised them a better life but delivered only violence.
This is a set of insurgencies driven by Iraqi nationalism and a deep resentment over the lack of progress in the reconstruction of the country.
American commanders say they know that all too well, but they've got to stop the shooting before they can get back to rebuilding Iraq. Kimberly Dozier, CBS News, Baghdad.
Coming up on the Friday CBS Evening News, the Scott Peterson trial. The murder case was sensationalized in extremists and made headlines for 2 years. Today's verdict was no exception. We'll give you the inside story. And later, dialing 911. We'll give you some vital information on getting help, something you should do before it's too late. That's the CBS Friday Consumer Alert. But first, CBS News honors fallen heroes. Aaron Elant was educated in a one-room schoolhouse. He loved fishing and reading, but his passion was working on his '69 Chrysler. In Iraq, Elant wrote to school kids back home, offering advice and thanking them for their support. He was killed by a roadside bomb. Elant was a sergeant, but the title he liked most was friend. The brutal crime brought on an orgy of national coverage. The trial dragged on for 6 long months. It was messy and confusing. And today, a California jury finally found Scott Peterson guilty of murdering his pregnant wife and their unborn son. CBS's John Blackstone gives you the inside story.
A crowd outside the Redwood City Courthouse waited in tense silence for the verdict.
Find the defendant, Scott Lee Peterson, guilty of the crime of murder.
There were cheers, too, in Modesto, Lacey Peterson's hometown. Inside the courtroom, even the judge seemed to choke with emotion. Lacey Peterson's family sobbed, but Scott Peterson showed no obvious reaction. His mother walked in silence out of the courthouse, past the crowd still cheering the verdict. When Lacey Peterson, 8 months pregnant, disappeared on Christmas Eve 2002, police immediately treated Scott Peterson as a suspect. Investigators searched his home and office. They tracked his movements and wiretapped his phones. Then they discovered there was another woman in his life, Amber Fry.
We did have a romantic relationship.
But for weeks before going public, Fry had been cooperating with investigators. In wiretapped phone calls, jurors heard Peterson telling a string of lies, carrying on an affair, even as the search continued for his missing wife.
Amber, I just enjoy listening to you.
Throughout the trial, prosecutors used Peterson's own words against him. In a television interview, he claimed he couldn't bear to enter the nursery waiting for the baby boy Lacey was expecting.
Do you go into the baby's room?
No, that door's closed.
How long will it remain closed?
Oh, there's the little guy in there.
But then prosecutors showed the jury photos of the nursery being used for storage. In April 2003, the decomposing bodies of a baby and a woman washed up on San Francisco Bay. Near the place, Scott said he was fishing the day Lacey disappeared. Scott was arrested in San Diego with his hair dyed blonde and thousands of dollars in cash.
Now, Scott Peterson faces the possibility of execution. That will be decided in the penalty phase beginning in 10 days. Dan?
John Blackstone reporting live from outside the court in Redwood City, California. The government reported today that Americans increased their spending again last month. Retail sales rose 0.2% overall in spite of a sharp decline in auto sales. Wall Street liked it. The Dow rose 69 points, the Nasdaq 24. Both indices were up solidly for the week. There's word tonight of another impending resignation from the Bush cabinet. Education Secretary Rod Page of Houston is said to be preparing to leave. Page, who is 71, has been a key backer of the president's controversial education policies. Just ahead on the CBS Evening News, there's something you should know about dialing 111 in an emergency, something that could save a life. CBS's Friday Consumer Alert investigation is next. We have a follow-up tonight to the ongoing CBS News investigation of rollover accidents involving sport utility vehicles. Two major SUV makers, GM and Ford, have announced plans to provide anti-rollover stabilizing systems as standard equipment in their SUV models for late 2005. You know the drill. In an emergency, dial 111 and help should be on the way. But what if emergency workers have the wrong address? It happens more often than you might think, sometimes with tragic results. So how can you be sure they know where to go? CBS's Bob McNamara has information you need in CBS's Friday Consumer Alert.
In suburban Des Moines.
911. Hi, my husband is in cardiac arrest. Okay. And I'm at 3411 Southwest 35th Street in Ankeny.
But emergency crews were sent to the wrong house because the caller's phone number wasn't linked to the right address.
Therefore, I'm here, and the subject said there's nothing wrong here.
Rescuers did finally reach the correct address, but too late to save 48-year-old Scott Mine.
It happens a lot, I believe. And I just don't think people realize it or don't report it. It's just this time when someone died.
In a Denver suburb, a similar mistake.
Ma'am, calm down. Is he conscious? Ma'am?
5-month-old Christopher Vasquez's mother's call was transferred several times in an address mix-up, and the infant died.
No mother would ever want to do that. Never.
Here in the Denver area alone, hundreds of wrong addresses have been reported in the 911 system in each of the last several years. Now, in a campaign to correct address errors, 911 database provider Entrado introduced a way customers can verify whether their phone number and address match the 911 records.
If this is correct, press 1. If not, press 2.
What's the problem, sir?
Despite a heavy volume of 911 calls nationwide, emergency industry officials say that any errors are usually human and rare.
Probably 0.1% would be a lot.
911, what's the emergency?
I've been shot, please.
Okay.
I'm bleeding
Who
to
shot
death.
you, ma'am?
It took 45 minutes to find this Anchorage, Alaska caller after emergency crews went to the wrong address.
Is there a flag in your driveway? No.
The caller survived.
Oh, God!
But the mother trapped in this tragedy says no one should assume 911 has their correct address.
Don't call 911, but call their phone companies and make sure.
Krista Stott says her case is a crusade now to correct a system that so many trusted but failed a helpless infant who needed it most. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Denver.
Next here on the CBS Evening News, they may not look like rebels, but they're defying orders from their own church. We'll tell you why straight ahead. A 69-year-old Massachusetts man pleaded innocent today to charges of trespassing in his own church. He is one of many Roman Catholics in Boston resisting orders to close 82 churches because of a shortage of priests and fallout from the sex abuse scandal. CBS's Sharon Alfonsi reports on this growing revolt.
Splendore della Chiesa.
They hardly look like a bunch of troublemakers, but these Italian grandmothers are part of a growing rebellion against the Archdiocese of Boston. Their church was officially closed last month, but they refused to leave, instead sleeping on the floor.
Yes, it gets awfully cold.
And keeping vigil 24/7. Devoted Catholics fueled by what seems to be an endless supply of coffee, faith, and defiance.
They're going to have to drag me, cuff me, punch me.
Or arrest her. That's what happened last week to this 69-year-old man when he refused to leave his church.
The Catholic Church has never seen anything like this before.
At least 8 parishes are now in open revolt, and others are expected to follow. Some say church leaders shouldn't be surprised.
You can't take someone's love for the church and devotion to its well-being and throw that away as if it didn't count for anything.
Part of the problem is that despite promises, parishioners say they were left out of the massive restructuring plan by a diocese awash in debt following the priest abuse scandal.
This is a dash for cash. This is about the money.
Now, facing a PR disaster, the diocese is delaying some closures and reviewing its strategy.
They say we're not leaving, then what do?
You keep talking.
Until
we find our way to common ground.
But in this case, it's the common ground that is precisely the problem.
This is our church. It's not theirs.
The irony of the situation isn't lost on church leaders. They've been trying for years to get the faithful to come to church. Now, they can't get them to leave. Sharon Alfonsi, CBS News, Boston.
Part of our world tonight, Sunday morning here on CBS. Face the nation, don't forget it. Now, here's a look at tomorrow night's 48 Hours.
A successful young woman, a banker, vanishes.
So many different things could have happened.
What does her doctor know?
You couldn't sit down and make this story up. There's sex, drugs, plastic surgery.
A 48 Hours mystery, Saturday.
That's 48 Hours tomorrow night at 10, 9 Central. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Have a great weekend. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, click on cbsnews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart, saving you and your family time and money with everyday low prices.
How to eat less and still feel satisfied on the Saturday Early Show. Experience CBS News.